There is a moment in every powerful institution's history where the mask slips, where the carefully constructed image of unity, tradition, and control cracks, just enough for the world to see what's really been hiding underneath. For professional golf, that moment arrived not with a press conference, not with a leaked memo, not with a dramatic confrontation on the 18th green at Augusta. It arrived quietly, almost politely, the way the most devastating things in life always do. A single decision, wrapped in the language of tradition and respect, dropped into the golf world like a stone into still water. And then came the ripples, the outrage, the confusion, the whispers that became shouts inside clubhouses, comment sections, and boardrooms from Georgia to London to Riyadh. Players who had given their careers to the PGA Tour felt the ground shift beneath their feet. Fans who had loved this sport for decades suddenly asked themselves a question they never expected to ask. Is the game they love being stolen from them in plain sight? What Augusta National just didn't just embarrass the PGA Tour. It may have broken something that can never be repaired. And tonight, we're going to tell you exactly what happened, why it matters, and what it truly means for the soul of professional golf. If you've been following golf closely, and I mean really closely, not just the highlight reels and the Sunday leaderboards, then you already sensed something was wrong. You could feel it in the air, the same way you feel a storm before the sky actually darkens. The PGA Tour has been walking a tightrope for years now. On one side, the weight of tradition, legacy, and the loyalty of millions of fans who grew up watching Tiger, Phil, and Jack. On the other side, the seductive, almost irresistible gravitational pull of Saudi money, LIV Golf's guaranteed contracts, and a new generation of players who decided they were done being underpaid and overworked by an organization that had long confused obedience with loyalty. And right in the middle of all of it, standing on the most sacred ground in golf, sits Augusta National. Patient, powerful, watching. Augusta has always been the one institution in golf that answers to nobody. Not the PGA Tour, not the DP World Tour, not LIV, not the networks, not the sponsors, only itself. And that independence, that almost arrogant self-sufficiency, is exactly what makes what they just did so significant. Because when Augusta moves, everything else in golf has to react. There is no choice. There is no negotiation. You adapt or you become irrelevant. If you've ever felt that the politics of professional sports have become more important than the sport itself, drop a comment below, because what we're about to unpack is exactly that kind of story. Let's go back, because context is everything here. The PGA Tour's relationship with Augusta National has always been complicated in the most sophisticated, unspoken way. Augusta hosts the Masters tournament, one of the 4 major championships in golf, and widely considered by most players and fans to be the most prestigious event in the entire sport. Winning the Masters isn't just about a green jacket. It's about legacy. It's about joining a brotherhood so exclusive it doesn't even need to advertise itself. For decades, the PGA Tour and Augusta operated in a kind of elegant détente. Mutually beneficial, strategically aligned, but never truly equal. Augusta tolerated the Tour. The Tour needed Augusta far more than Augusta ever needed the Tour. That power imbalance was always there, just politely unacknowledged, the way certain truths are in old money circles. Then LIV Golf arrived, and suddenly, the polite silence became a roar. When the Saudi-backed league began signing players, big names, established names, names that had built the Tour's television ratings and filled its sponsor tents, the PGA Tour panicked. They suspended players. They issued ultimatums. They talked about loyalty and integrity with the kind of righteous conviction that only institutions under genuine threat seem to suddenly discover. And here's where Augusta made its first quiet, devastating move. They said nothing. They simply continued inviting LIV players to the Masters. No suspensions, no political statements, no loyalty tests. Just the quiet, dignified act of recognizing that the Masters is bigger than any tour's internal politics. That silence was itself a message, and the PGA Tour heard it louder than anything said out loud. Now, fast forward to the decision that has shaken the golf world in recent weeks. The Masters has made a series of structural and qualification adjustments that, on the surface, appear to be routine housekeeping. Field adjustments, world ranking thresholds, criteria refinements. But when you read between the lines, when you talk to the players, the agents, the insiders who understand how Augusta communicates, because Augusta always communicates in subtext, never in headlines, you begin to understand what is actually being said. The message is this: Augusta is recalibrating its relationship with professional golf. Not toward the PGA Tour, not toward LIV, toward the game itself, toward a vision of what the Masters should represent that exists entirely outside the current war for the soul of professional golf. And that recalibration, that quiet repositioning of the most powerful event in the sport, leaves the PGA Tour in a deeply uncomfortable place. Because if Augusta doesn't need them, and it's becoming increasingly clear that Augusta doesn't, then what exactly is the Tour's ultimate source of authority? What is the card in their hand that matters? When you remove the Masters from the equation, when you imagine a world where Augusta simply does what Augusta wants regardless of who controls professional golf's weekly calendar, the PGA Tour's leverage shrinks to something much smaller than its public image suggests. Think about the players right now, the ones who sacrificed LIV money to stay loyal, to keep their tour cards, to believe in the promise of a merger that still hasn't fully materialized. What must it feel like to watch the institution you chose loyalty over simply move forward on its own terms, indifferent to the battle you sacrificed for? Let's talk about the fans for a moment, because the fan reaction to all of this has been something to witness. Social media has been volcanic. The comments sections under every major golf outlet's coverage read like dispatches from a community genuinely grieving something. Not just angry, grieving. Because that's what this really is. Golf fans aren't furious simply because of a bureaucratic decision about tournament qualifications. They're furious because they feel the sport they love has been taken hostage by forces that don't actually care about the game. They see a PGA Tour that spent years telling players to be loyal while quietly negotiating its own financial arrangements. They see Augusta operating with a detachment that feels, depending on your perspective, either admirably principled or coldly indifferent. They see players they admire, Rory McIlroy, who spent years as the Tour's most vocal defender, who went on record again and again staking his reputation on the belief that the right side would win, looking exhausted and uncertain in a way that breaks your heart a little if you've been watching closely. Rory has carried so much of this political weight publicly, more than any player arguably should have to. And the question that keeps surfacing among fans, the quiet one underneath all the outrage, is whether any of it was worth it. If that question landed somewhere in your chest just now, if you've ever rooted for something only to wonder whether the thing you were rooting for deserved it, then you understand exactly what's at stake emotionally here. Here is what the PGA Tour's defenders will tell you, and it's important to hear them fairly. They will tell you that the Tour has made genuine structural reforms, that the elevated events, the increased prize money, the player equity arrangements, these are real improvements that reflect a real reckoning with the way the organization had underpaid and undervalued its talent for decades. They will tell you that the framework agreement with the Public Investment Fund, Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, represents not a surrender, but a pragmatic evolution. That in a world where sports entertainment is increasingly a global capital competition, the Tour had no choice but to engage with that reality. They will tell you that Augusta's independence isn't a threat to the Tour, but a feature of golf's broader ecosystem. That having a major championship exist outside political allegiances actually protects the sport's credibility in the long run. These are not stupid arguments. They are, in many ways, reasonable arguments made by people who genuinely believe in the institution they're defending. But here's the problem with reasonable arguments in emotionally charged moments. They don't land. They don't comfort. They don't address the feeling, and feelings, as any student of sports culture will tell you, are what actually drive fan loyalty. And right now, the feeling among a significant portion of the golf world is one of betrayal. Not confusion, not disagreement. Betrayal. That specific, sharp, personal variety of disappointment that only comes when you believed in something and it turned out to be smaller than you thought. The deeper story here, and there is always a deeper story, is about the nature of power in professional sports. Golf has always been different from other major professional sports in one structurally unique way. It has never had a single governing body with real teeth. In basketball, the NBA is the undisputed center of gravity. In American football, The NFL controls the narrative absolutely. But golf? Golf has the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour, Augusta National, the USGA, the R&A, LIV Golf, and half a dozen other organizations all pulling in different directions simultaneously, each claiming some form of moral or institutional authority over the game. What Augusta just demonstrated, whether intentionally or simply by virtue of acting in accordance with its own long-held principles, is that in a fragmented landscape, the entity that remains most consistent, most autonomous, and most indifferent to outside pressure holds the most real power. The Masters doesn't need to win the political argument. It just needs to remain the Masters. That's a kind of strategic invincibility that the PGA Tour, despite its size and its history, simply cannot replicate. Because the Tour is a membership organization, it requires consensus. It requires compromise. Augusta requires neither. It simply exists, every April, on the same piece of Georgia ground it has always occupied, and the world of golf reorganizes itself around it. So where does this leave us? Where does this leave the players, the fans, the sport itself? The honest answer is that nobody knows with certainty, which is perhaps the most unsettling part of all. What we can say is this: the PGA Tour is at an inflection point more serious than any it has faced in the modern era. The merger framework with LIV remains unresolved in ways that matter enormously. The promised player equity stakes, the governance reforms, the unified global tour that was going to solve everything. None of it has fully materialized in the concrete, irreversible way that would actually stabilize the situation. Augusta has demonstrated that it will not wait for the tour to sort itself out. It will continue to be Augusta, on Augusta's terms, and the rest of professional golf will have to figure out how to exist in relationship to that reality. The players who stayed loyal to the tour are watching. The players who left for LIV are watching. The agents, the sponsors, the broadcasters, the networks, everyone is watching. And what they're all watching for is the same thing, the same signal that every power struggle eventually produces. The moment when one side blinks. The moment when the carefully maintained appearances finally give way to the underlying reality that has been building for years. That moment, based on everything we're seeing, is closer than most people in the industry are publicly willing to admit. There is a version of this story that ends well, where the competing interests of the various tours, the major championships, and the global golf economy find some form of sustainable equilibrium, where the players get the financial security and respect they deserve, where the fans get a product that feels coherent and meaningful rather than fractured and politically exhausting, where Augusta's independence becomes a stabilizing force rather than a destabilizing one, a North Star for a sport that has lost its sense of direction. That version of the story is possible. It requires leadership. It requires honesty about the mistakes that have been made on all sides. It requires the PGA Tour to stop defending its institutional ego long enough to actually hear what the game needs from it. It requires Augusta to perhaps engage, even slightly, with the broader ecosystem it inhabits, not to compromise its independence, but to use its authority in service of healing rather than simply observing. And it requires the fans, the millions of people who genuinely love this sport, who grew up watching it, who feel it in their bones in a way that no amount of political noise can fully extinguish, to keep demanding better. Because that demand, that refusal to accept a diminished version of something beautiful, is ultimately the only leverage that matters. What happens next in professional golf will say a great deal about whether the people who control the sport understand that, or whether they will only understand it once it's too late. If this channel exists to do one thing, it's to keep asking the questions the game's power brokers would rather not answer. And if that matters to you, you already know what to do.